Has the pain stopped? Is the crash over? Have comics turned the corner? Is now the time to buy? These are all questions that comic book collectors have been wondering for the past couple years now. And in this video, thanks to the Comic Book Index, we are going to try to give some answers here today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Oh my God, it's been a while, right? It's been a while since we've had an update to the Comic Book Index. And this is going to be a really exciting one because we have 4 months of data to talk about here. Yeah, that is right. It's been 4 months since I made an update to this thing. And, a lot has changed in the comic book world. Ever since we had our last conversation, at that point, we were asking the question, how are these summer movies going to affect the comic book market? If in fact they do affect the comic book market anymore. Would Superman absolutely be able to create a golden age of DC comics? Would Fantastic Four shed a new turn in direction for the Marvel Cinematic Universe? And would that trickle over to comic book collectors making purchases of graded comic books on the secondary market? Well, if the Comic Book Index has any value to you guys, maybe it could shed some light on those questions here today. Now, of course, before I get into it, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, appreciate it. Helps support the channel and doing those things. But let us get into it. The Comic Book Index. Now, what is the Comic Book Index? The Comic Book Index is the top 100 sold books per age. I take all of the keys in silver, bronze, and copper. I pick the highest volume of grade, meaning which book within the graded census of those keys sells the most. I focus on that one. I take the final sale of each month and I average them all together based off of GPA data. So suffice to say, if I was going to buy the top 100 most in-demand, most bought and sold key comics within each age, how much would it cost me to do on a month-by-month basis? Well, last time we did that, we were in April of 2025, where it would have cost us $35,508 to buy all of the top 100 Silver Age comic books. This was the second lowest number we have seen for this particular index within the last 4 years or so. I mean, basically, you have to go all the way back to the pre-comic book COVID boom of December of 2020, when we were more around the $34,256 range. And then, of course, we had the explosion of comic book prices. And ever since then, we have been on the downturn. Well, where did we go in the summer months of 2025? Let's take a look forward. And we are now at 38,388. We have actually been on a little bit of an uptick ever since that of April. Now, it's been a little bit swingy, okay? In April, we were at 35,000. Then we jumped up to 40,000. Then we went down a little bit to 39,000, then down a little bit now to 38,000. But generally speaking, if you kind of zoom out to the 1-year average, you can actually see that we've kind of been seeing some lower highs overall, where we kind of bottomed out at 34,516 back in December of 24. And then we kind of had some ups and then some downs and then some up and then some down. And maybe as we kind of move forward, we're going to continue to go sideways where, we've kind of hit that bottom. I mean, I'm not going to call it here. You know what? I'm not going to say a bottom, but if you look at this graph, I mean, we kind of been chopping to the side. And I think more than anything, at least in terms of right now, the biggest drops have already occurred. Maybe we're still on a overall downtrend as we go throughout the course of the year. And frankly, we may never bounce back up. There's no guarantee for comic books as a hobby to continue on. We could literally go to zero. If there's no more people that want to collect comic books, and there's a good argument to suggest that, the younger generation don't want to collect comic books anymore, I mean, we could absolutely go to zero. But if you're somebody who, believes in comic books, at least in, terms of it, sustaining over the course of the next 10 years or so, 15, 20 years, however long you think it actually is going to exist, the big question is, will there ever be a time when, they start to, go up in value? I mean, you would think that they would, based on, the rate of inflation. I mean, inflation is just going to carry everything to go up in value. But the point of this graph is to sort of show us a model that can maybe sort of give us a good indication of when might be a good time where we can feel comfortable buying once again and not lose our money. If you wanted to buy a Daredevil #1 today at fair market value, would 6 months from now it be cheaper? Well, the trend has been that, yeah, it probably is going to be cheaper. But, given these last 6 to 7 months or so, it's kind of been like, any given month, we probably hover around a similar price and there hasn't been that big decline. So maybe you can have confidence in buying that key that you really want. But before we really unpack that, let's get into the Bronze Age Index here. Last time we did an update in April of 2025, we were at $29,333, which is basically tied for the lowest number that this index has seen ever since that of 2020, just like the Silver Age. Well, let's take a look and see where we are after these summer months. Well, now we are up to 30,941. So we've kind of been on a little bit of an uptick, ever since that of April. We had a horizontal month, and then we had an up month, and then we kind of had a down month last month, but now we had kind of a big upswing to this one. And we're now at that $30,000 price point again, which if you're really bullish about comic books, you can make the argument and say that that's actually the fourth highest number that we've seen in the last year. So, we're in the top 30% in terms of month of sales for comic books. And again, maybe we're starting to see some higher lows, maybe we're going to trend up again, it's still TBD, we're not really here to make any proclamations. And, again, we're just going to kind of follow the charts, on a month by month basis, or at least on a quarterly basis, and just take the numbers as they come. And in fact, as you guys are watching this video, I'd love to hear your thoughts when you guys see these sort of numbers. Do these sort of cross your own experience with, comic books that maybe you've been buying or you've been selling? What's been kind of your feeling about the comic book market overall, where the values are? And do you kind of feel like this is really, truly, unironically, sort of an indication that, yeah, we've kind of hit that bottom, or we've kind of turned that corner, and we're feeling a little more optimistic going into the end of the year and into 2026. All right, let's kind of jump forward now to the Copper Age Index. In April of 2025, we were at 20,841. Well, what do we do in the summer months for the Copper Age? Now we are at 20,485, which is basically a push. I mean, that's literally the difference of one sale in any given month. I mean, like the Bronze Age, it's been a little bit of a ping pong. We had an up month, and we down month, and we had an up month, and now we're kind of at a down month, but we're kind of at a higher low, for this particular month. So again, did we turn the corner? Remains to be seen. Well, there you guys see the side-by-side of all three charts if you guys want to take a snapshot of that. But let's focus in on the key takeaways here and kind of give you guys the nitty-gritty of the numbers. This is the 120-day update for the Silver Age. In April, we're at $35,508 to August now, $38,388, an increase of 7%. For Bronze, we are $29,333 to August, $30,941, an increase of 5%. And for the Copper Age, August, $20,485, basically a push. Now, again, if we're talking comparisons to other markets, Pokemon cards, S&P 500, crypto, comic books have performed terribly, especially against, the rate of inflation. You'd probably be better off keeping your money in a CD. But at the same time, at least we're not losing money anymore. There was a time when we were losing like 50% value on every single comic month by month. But let's kind of continue on here with the key takeaways. Silver book values, 14% were down this month, 9% were up, 27% non-sale. I think the key thing to talk about here is the non-sale factor. Last time we had a non-sale check-in, it was 38%. I mean, that was one of the highest numbers of books not being sold on the secondary market. Now it's kind of going back in line. So, even if the prices are not setting record prices, or even if we're still on the lower end of the values for the top 100, at least people are buying comic books. And that's been, one of the kind of big discussions and things that I think is, consistently true as we talk to people. It's like everybody knows that, like, we're not setting record prices for a lot of comic books, but there is still demand there for people. People still want to get those key books. People still want to fill their runs. People still want to go into LCSs. They just have to buy it at the right price, or they have to feel like they're getting good value out of it. For Bronze books, we got 14% down, 16% up, so basically equal 11% non-sale, which again is a lower non-sale level for any given month for the Bronze Age, which means again there's a lot of demand. Now, my favorite chart to talk about, the month by month, we are focusing on the pink line. Is that pink, or is that kind of more of a magenta? Either way, the pinkish line of 2025, it's kind of right smack dab in the middle. And I think the interesting thing to compare it to is the yellow line. So we kind of see where the Silver Age values were in comparison to 2020. So, now here we are, we've kind of gotten all the COVID froth out, and we're, basically hovering slightly above that of the 2020 values. And I think that that's, going to be a thing that remains consistent, at least, throughout the end of the year. We're probably going to continue to go sideways. And I have a sneaking suspicion that by the time we get to the December dot, it's going to be probably very similar in terms of its, height around the January dot, which means, the entire calendar year, we had kind of a sideways moving year, which was, a lot less of a downgrade than that of the purple line, which was last year where we had a slight decrease, and then 2023 where we had an even bigger decrease, and then 22 and 21 where we had very large decreases. So I think the big decreases have already sort of happened. The question is, are we ever going to have increases again? That's actually going to be hard to say. Well, here is the comic book trend line. Again, this is not drawn to scale, but just something to kind of show you guys, just so you guys get a little bit of a snapshot and a feel. And even though it's not drawn to scale, it does kind of show you that comic books have been kind of going up against that resistance level. I mean, the further out you kind of stretch the timeline, the more the rate of inflation just raises the value of everything. So it's not that like comic books go up, but the devaluation of the dollar continues to be a thing. So therefore, things get more expensive. So therefore, comic books eventually are going to hit this trend line, assuming again people want to buy comic books, which who knows if people want to buy comic books anymore, which brings us to the bear and the bull case. All right, let's talk about, the bear case for now. If we're talking about comic books and investing and all that sort of stuff, which I know is kind of a dirty word, and we're not really here to talk about investing in comic books. But if we're talking about that, comic books have been one of the worst investments I think you could probably do as far as all the places where you can put your money. If you're talking about stocks and crypto and even, money market accounts and things like that, I mean, you've been doing much better in all other places aside from comic books. But, we don't really buy comic books like that, right? We're not really here to trade comic books like investors or stock pickers or whatever. Really, if you really want to make money in comic books, it's all about arbitrage. But I digress on that talking point. I mean, let's focus on the cultural aspect stuff. I mean, we had the Superman movie. People generally seem to like it. Didn't have the biggest box office, as far as a superhero movie is concerned, but it was probably, an average superhero box office. Fantastic Four probably underperformed, generally speaking, but at the same time, I guess it improved upon the last couple of MCU movies. So interest in superheroes and stuff, still there, but definitely not where it was at the height of things. So, if we're feeling, bearish about comic books, I mean, maybe people don't want to collect anymore, but I don't know, just from a gut check standpoint, I kind of feel a little more bullish on the side of comic books here. I think people are, kind of getting more positive about stuff. They're wanting to pick up some of those keys. People are, more interested in, the big sales, and people are starting to feel a little bit better and opening up their wallets. And I think the stories are getting better if you're a modern comic book fan. And so overall, I think that things are kind of looking up. I think people are, just enjoying the hobby again. I think we've gotten rid of all the tourists, the ones that were like the hardcore speculators. I mean, of course, there's always going to be speculators, but, when things were going crazy in those COVID years, people were really entering the hobby, and now they're moved on. They've moved on to Pokemon and Labubu. So, we kind of have a very pure collector base within comic books right now. And I think that collector base that is in comic books, I think for the most part is pretty positive. So we could be at a point where now the despair is over. Maybe we're returning to the mean. I've shown this chart before. This is the psychology of the investor, but I think it's interesting to compare it to, these values in terms of comic books and what they've kind of shown us over these last couple of years. It feels like we've really, really, gone along this line perfectly. Anyways, that's all for this video. That was me giving you guys an update on the comic book index here in the month of August 2025. I mean, I guess it's September, but we have the August numbers to talk about. So we've kind of seen, the summertime, a little bit of a turning of the corner for comic book values. I mean, again, you could zoom out and still say that the overall trend is still going down. We can't really make a call yet. We kind of have to finish out the year and really start to, understand where everything is going to fall, where the chips are going to lie at the end of the day. But, at least in terms of right now, things are looking up for the most part. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about sales right now? What do you think about comic book values? And again, guys, this is just one point of data. This is just one kind of sample size, one little model I created. It's not a perfect system. It's not a perfect science. It's just information for you guys. And again, it's not meant to be something that it's like, oh, now is the time to buy to get rich in comic books. It's really just a tool that I want to share with you guys to help you on your comic book buying, purchasing, selling, collecting journey. And hopefully you guys find value out of it. Anyways, that's all for this one. Let me know what you guys think. Like, comment, subscribe. See y'all in the next video.